Are you a nurse looking to get a high score in the OET speaking test? If so, knowing how to gather information is absolutely crucial. In this video, I will show you how to ask the right questions at the right time, adapt to the patient's needs, and demonstrate the skills that the examiner wants to see. Let me help you get a high score in your OET speaking test. First, let's take a look at exactly what I mean by information gathering by referring to the speaking criteria. You can see that for this criterion, there are 5 indicators, and you need to sufficiently demonstrate each one in order to score highly. So the first one, let's take a look. You're going to use active listening techniques and minimize interruption. So this means while they're giving you information, you listen attentively and don't interrupt. The second one, you're going to use open questions and then move on to closed questions. We will look at exactly what those are in just a moment. The third one is avoiding compound questions and leading questions. Again, I will show you some examples of these later in the video. Next, you're going to clarify statements which are vague or need amplification. This means if a patient gives you some information which is not very clear, you know exactly how to clarify what they say and getting more specific details from them. And finally, this will test your ability to summarize information to encourage correction or invite further information from the patient. Now we've looked at exactly what is required of you in this assessment criteria, let's look in detail about how you can demonstrate each of these 5 skills. The first one requires you to listen actively and minimize interruptions. Active listening means making reassuring noises or signaling with your body language that you're paying attention to the patient. For example, nodding your head and making noises such as, I see, right. This shows that you're giving the patient your full attention. Next, you're going to avoid interrupting the patient. This is something that you should absolutely avoid doing during that interaction, as it will really affect your score here and also for relationship building. So never interrupt the patient when they're speaking. Next, you're going to ask open and closed questions in order to gather the information you need in an efficient way. Now let's talk about exactly what I mean by open and closed questions. An open question is a question that invites a range of general information from the patient. You're not gathering answers to very specific questions. Open questions tend to start with the word what or why or how. Closed questions, on the other hand, are used to gather very specific details. They tend to be questions which are answered with a yes or a no, or have a very small range of possible answers, and these are used to narrow down the information. Now let me show you exactly what I mean by this with an example roll card. In this roll card, you can see that you are talking with the parent of a 3-year-old girl who has been brought to the emergency department. Now let's go to the bullet points to find out the tasks that we need to complete, and then think about the open and closed questions that we will ask. So our first task is to find out more information about the child's symptoms. Now at this point, we're going to start with open questions to gather information. For example, could you tell me what symptoms she has been experiencing? This is an open question which invites the caregiver of this patient to give you a broad range of information. Once you've found out the symptoms, you're also going to need to find out things like duration, triggers, changes in severity. So an example of another open question you might ask is, can you think of anything that may have triggered this? Now, depending on how much information your interlocutor gives you at this point, you can then move on to closed questions to really narrow down the details. For example, how long has she had these symptoms? This is a closed question because it invites a limited number of responses. The interlocutor will respond with a duration. How long? Has she experienced these symptoms before? This is another example of a closed question because the answer that can be given will be either yes or no. Now let's look at the second bullet point. You're going to explore further relevant details about the child. Some examples of an open question could be, how is her health in general? This will invite the parent to give some broad information about the child's health. We're then going to move on to some closed questions to really narrow down this information. Has she been ill recently? The answer will either be yes or no. Is there a family history of asthma? Again, the answer will be yes or no. You can see that by asking this range of closed and open questions allows you to effectively gather the information that you need. We've looked at the types of questions you should ask in the role play. Now let's look at some questions you shouldn't ask, which are compound and leading questions. What exactly are these? Well, compound questions are when you ask two things at the same time. This is a bad idea because your patient might only answer one part of the question, in which case you'll need to then ask again for the rest of the information, which is really not a very efficient way of gathering information. But also the patient might become confused by all of the questions being asked at once. So only ask one thing at a time. Another type of question you should avoid is a leading question. This is where you encourage a specific response from the patient. And this is a bad idea because it might encourage the patient to give you inaccurate information. Let's look at some examples of compound and leading questions to avoid now. In the second bullet point, you can see that you're required to get quite a lot of information regarding health, recent illness, medication, family history, but it's important that you don't ask about all of these things at once. For example, has she been ill recently and does she take any medication? This is a bad question because you are asking two things at once. The patient might only answer part of the question. Another question we want to avoid is something like this. Symptoms have been becoming more frequent, haven't they? This type of question encourages the patient to say yes, even if it isn't true. So these kinds of questions, which we call tag questions, should definitely be avoided. Instead, you should ask the question, have the symptoms been getting frequent? So this encourages a more accurate response from the patient or caregiver. The next thing to keep in mind for this assessment criteria is that you clarify vague statements. This means if the patient gives you some information, but it's not detailed enough, you ask an appropriate question to get more information from them. Let's look at some examples of how you can do this. For example, the patient says, the symptoms happen frequently. You as the nurse can follow up with, when you say the symptoms happen frequently, how often do you mean? This will get a more specific answer from the patient. Another example, the patient might say, it's never happened like this before. You as the nurse can say, am I right in thinking that this is the first time she has experienced symptoms like this? Finally, if your caregiver says, she hasn't been feeling very well recently, you can clarify this by asking, could you tell me exactly what type of symptoms she's been experiencing? You can see in these three examples, the patient or caregiver did not give very detailed information, but we followed up with an appropriate question to get more specific details from them. And the final part of this assessment criteria is that you summarize the information clearly. This means ending the role play with an appropriate summary of what you've talked about. For example, I'll just go over what we've talked about today. You told me that, and then summarize what the patient said. Is that right? And then asking that question at the end, is that right, gives the patient the opportunity to contradict you or add some more details that they feel are important. So do make sure that at the end of your role play, you leave a little bit of time to summarize the main points of what you've talked about and give the patient or caregiver an opportunity to clarify or confirm any extra details. So to recap, in order to get top marks for information gathering, you need to do 5 things. First, listen attentively and don't interrupt. Second, ask a variety of open and closed questions appropriately. Third, avoid compound or leading questions that might give you inaccurate or incomplete information. Fourth, clarify vague statements to get more specific information when needed. And fifth, summarize what you've talked about in the role play and give your patient or caregiver an opportunity to contradict or add more details. If you can do these 5 things, you are well on your way to getting a top score for information gathering. Now, if you're feeling a little bit uncertain about the OET speaking test or OET in general, then Swoosh English is here to help. I'm offering you the chance to book a free one-to-one consultation call with our student success team. In that call, you will receive personalized, dedicated attention to help you pinpoint your strengths and weaknesses, talk about your current exam strategy, and a look at your study plan to make sure you're really getting the most out of your preparation. The call is designed to help you plan for your OET test in the best way possible and give you an idea of how we at Swoosh English can help you achieve your dreams much quicker. The call is designed to remove any doubt and show you how Swoosh English can help you achieve your OET dreams much more quickly. All you have to do to book that free call is to click on the link in the description below this video. Our student success team are ready and waiting to help you achieve your OET dreams. We'll see you very soon in another video, and in the meantime, happy studying.